Welcome back to Horror Jolt, where we examine a brutal real-life incident involving a driver whose hidden past violent hit-and-run caught up with him on a dark highway during a relentless rainstorm. 5 years before that stormy night, a man named Mark was driving along a deserted forest road when his vehicle struck a female pedestrian standing near the shoulder. The impact shattered his front headlight, sending metal fragments across the wet asphalt, while the victim crashed onto his hood before rolling into the roadside ditch. Mark slammed his brakes, stepped out into the pouring rain, and walked toward the ditch with his flashlight beam shaking against the mud. He saw the woman lying face down in the dirt with severe physical injuries, but instead of calling for emergency assistance, he dragged her heavy coat out of sight to conceal the evidence. Panic took over his body as he hauled her unconscious frame into the deep brush, wiped his hands on his denim jeans, and quickly drove away into the darkness. Over the following years, Mark cut off all contact with his past, moved to another state, and deliberately forced himself to block out every memory of that fatal evening. On a dark night in the present year, Mark was driving his sedan through a heavy downpour on the exact same desolate stretch of highway. Thunder echoed across the mountain pass while his windshield wipers struggled to clear the heavy streams of water blocking his view of the road ahead. Suddenly, a heavy thud slammed against his front bumper, causing the vehicle to skid across the slick pavement before coming to a halt. Mark grabbed his flashlight, stepped out into the mud, and inspected the front end of his car to see what he had just hit. The bumper was bent inward and covered in thick grease, but there was no human body lying on the highway or in the nearby ditch. He shone his light beneath the vehicle and spotted a soaked, mud-covered yellow rain jacket wedged tightly around the front axle. Mark pulled the heavy fabric free, noticing that it was shredded and covered in fresh red oil stains that smelled heavily of gasoline. He tossed the soaked coat into his back seat, climbed back inside the driver's seat, and locked all four doors with a sharp mechanical click. As he accelerated down the highway, his rear-view mirror reflected a dark, wet mass sitting motionless in the center of the rear passenger seat. He turned his head quickly to check, but the back seat appeared completely empty under the dim interior roof light. When he looked back at the mirror, the reflection showed a pair of muddy boots resting directly on the carpet behind him. He reached his hand into the back area while keeping his eyes on the road, and his fingers brushed against cold, wet wool fabric resting on the seat cushion. He pulled his hand back immediately as the vehicle began to fishtail on the icy mud, forcing him to grip the steering wheel with both hands to avoid crashing into the side guardrail. The dashboard lights flickered violently as the engine began to sputter, forcing Mark to pull off onto an abandoned gas station lot surrounded by overgrown weeds. Rain slammed against the roof while Mark reached for the glove box to retrieve his emergency tools, but his hand hit a locked metal lockbox stored at the bottom. He pried open the box with a screwdriver, revealing a set of old keys, a waterlogged leather wallet, and a folded medical report dated 5 years prior. Mark unfolded the paper under the dome light and read his wife's full name alongside a detailed medical record documenting a severe spinal injury from a hit-and-run accident. Beside the document lay a broken cell phone that suddenly vibrated in his palm, playing an old recorded voice message through its damaged speaker. The voice belonged to his wife, pleading for him to return to the forest ditch where he had abandoned her on that cold night years ago. Realization hit him with physical force as he remembered that his wife had survived the initial impact, only to remain paralyzed in the brush while he fled the scene. He grabbed his flashlight, opened the driver door, and walked around to the trunk of his car to face whatever was inside. Mark inserted the key into the trunk lock, turned it with a heavy click, and lifted the heavy metal lid against the pouring rain. Inside the trunk lay a collection of his wife's personal belongings, including her muddy purse, her broken eyeglasses, and the identical yellow rain jacket he had pulled from his bumper minutes earlier. A rusted metal box in the corner held a stack of unpaid medical bills addressed to Mark, proving that he had been secretly paying for her long-term care facility while erasing her from his conscious memory. A final envelope contained a recent notice from the care facility, stating that his wife had passed away earlier that afternoon after years of immobility. Mark dropped the papers into the mud as the cold rain drenched his face and clothes, exposing the full reality of his cowardice and guilt. He realized that the accident tonight was not a new collision, but a psychological collapse triggered when his mind finally forced him to return to the site of his crime. He reached into the trunk to touch her old jacket, feeling the cold weight of the past that he had tried so hard to bury. The storm raged around the empty gas station, while Mark stood alone beside his idling vehicle, completely broken by the truth of what he had done. He climbed back into the driver's seat, closed the door against the wind, and stared at the empty road stretching into the dark mountains ahead. The rearview mirror was completely clear now, reflecting nothing except the rain running down the back window of his car. Mark sat in silence with the engine running, staring into the dark night as the reality of his actions permanently destroyed his life. One last question. If you were in her place at that moment, would you have done the same? Be honest, what does her choice deserve out of 10? Subscribe now, the best story is coming next.